Now, officials say they are targeting roughly 100 people involved with the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. But
the banging came first, then the shouting, "DA, open the door!" Before anyone inside could even move, the door exploded off its hinges and a flashbang grenade rolled across the floor. In an instant, the entire hallway was filled with blinding white smoke. Families scrambled, neighbors slammed their doors shut, terrified to even breathe. But this wasn't a war zone, it was a Denver apartment building. Agents stormed room after room, dragging people out in pajamas.
They were like knee-deep in front of my door, and they were asking me if I was American or if I was legal.
And here's the thing, this wasn't a cartel compound. No drugs, no weapon stockpile, just working families, suddenly caught in a federal takedown. ICE claimed they were hunting the feared Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua, but on that night, hardly anyone matched that description. So the question was already hanging in the air. Was this about catching gangsters or making an example? Just weeks earlier, Aurora, Colorado had already felt the shock of what many now call the dry run. It was February 5th at the Cedar Run Apartments. Inside a one-bedroom unit, 54-year-old Fernando Martinez was asleep on the couch. Before he could even stand, the door blasted open. Agents flooded in, tossing flashbangs straight into the living room, where the only thing on the table was a pile of empty beer cans.
And smoke, the smoke grenades or whatever.
They put in some flashbangs?
Yeah. One like directly towards me.
Fernando wasn't arrested. In fact, no one in that apartment was. They were zip-tied, questioned, and then released. But they weren't the only ones traumatized by the chaos. Families across the complex huddled in their bedrooms, too scared to even breathe. One resident later recalled,
Solo me metí a la habitación con mi familia y nos mantuvimos ahí, guardamos la calma. Mi esposa sí se puso un poco nerviosa, estaba llorando, se tiró al piso y ahí se quedó hasta que se fueron.
Another described the terror as agents hammered on her door.
Se asusta, pues apenas que llegan a tocar la puerta de esta manera fuertemente, a gritar que tenemos que abrirles la puerta.
Those with shaky paperwork, a missed court date, or even something as small as a DUI were hauled off into a waiting bus. By the time the sun rose, doors were splintered, locks ripped out, and neighbors stood on balconies whispering about what they had just witnessed. Advocates who confronted ICE agents asked to see warrants, but not a single one was shown. More than 100 armed agents from ICE, the DEA, and the ATF had swarmed the complex, claiming they were targeting members of Tren de Aragua. But according to immigrant rights groups, only about 5 people were actually detained. 5 arrests. After all that damage and trauma, ICE defended the raid, insisting,
as long as there are bad guys in the streets, we're going to be out here arresting them and making sure we're keeping these communities safe.
And they didn't stop there. Hours later, agents rolled into another complex, Whistling Pines, and walked out with 8 more people. This time, ICE made sure to spotlight one arrest in particular, a man wanted in Chile for kidnapping and extortion.
These actions were targeted operation focused on violent criminal aliens, TDA members, and those who are a threat to our public safety. I can tell you that one of the folks that was arrested was a fugitive from the country of Chile. He is a known TDA member, and he was wanted for kidnapping and extortion from another country.
To ICE, this was proof the raids were working. To activists, it was smoke and mirrors. They saw it as theater. A flex of power meant less to take down cartels and more to send a message. And that message, well, it was about to get louder. On the morning of July 12th, Denver woke up to deja vu. One resident described it perfectly.
And out of nowhere, I hear a loud bang on my door, right?
Mark Swell says next came an order.
They had their foot in the doorway. They were blocking me from closing the door, and then they demanded identification.
But this wasn't just another raid, it was a siege. For 9 straight days, from July 12th through July 20th, ICE unleashed wave after wave of operations across the Denver metro. And it wasn't just ICE. Homeland Security, CBP, the DEA, ATF, FBI, even the IRS were in on it. That's how massive this was. By the end of the sweep, 243 people were in custody. On paper, it sounded airtight. Every single arrest was labeled a serious criminal, with ICE boasting that 50 already had removal orders signed. But here's the problem. Out of 243 arrests, ICE only released the names and ages of 8. Of those, 5 had prior convictions and 1 faced pending charges. But what about the other 235? Who were they? What were their crimes? If ICE really had its sights locked on the worst of the worst, why storm entire apartment complexes, tossing flashbangs and dragging kids out of bed just to hide the details? To many, it didn't feel like precision. It felt like theater, and that's when ICE dropped a new claim, one that would take this story from frightening to terrifying. To silence the critics, ICE leaned into a new narrative. They said this wasn't random at all. Among the 243 arrests were some of the most dangerous criminals hiding in plain sight. And the names they dropped? Chilling. Rigoberto Carranza Mendez, 47, convicted of murder and a DUI. ICE announced he'd be deported immediately. Tomas Arana Fuentes, 49, facing charges for brutally assaulting vulnerable victims, including one described as incapable of appraising condition. Stories like these made headlines, and they worked. They fueled ICE's argument that these raids weren't random at all. They were necessary, but immigrant advocates weren't buying it. They argued ICE was blurring the lines on purpose, lumping in DUIs, car thefts, and missed court dates with murder, trafficking, and fentanyl. Was a drunk driver really the same as a cartel hitman? ICE said yes. Activists said it was smoke and mirrors, a scare tactic to justify sweeping up hundreds of people whose only crime was their immigration status.
As ICE ramps up its efforts, its ability to target people with criminal convictions goes down.
And while the debate raged, Denver started hearing whispers of something even darker. Because if ICE was right, then a foreign gang had already sunk its claws into the city.
There you can see the group well armed and forcing an apartment door open and making their way in.
That's when the whispers started, because this wasn't just about paperwork violations or old DUIs. Denver residents began hearing a name that sent shockwaves through the city: Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan prison gang infamous for human trafficking, drug smuggling, extortion, and kidnappings, the kind of terror you'd expect in Caracas, not Colorado. Videos began circulating online, masked men forcing open apartment doors, armed figures patrolling hallways. Tenants whispered about late-night raids, doors kicked in at 3 a.m., and entire complexes suddenly feeling like they were under someone else's control. Even the landlords admitted they had lost control. CBZ Management, which owned several of the complexes, went public with a chilling video. One of their own employees being attacked by suspected gang members during what should have been a routine inspection. Inside those buildings, the fear was real. Families barricaded themselves in their units. Complaints about violence and chaos piled up. Things got so bad that the city had to step in. Municipal officials shut some of those complexes down, citing health hazards. But everyone in Aurora knew it wasn't just about trash or leaky pipes. Police eventually linked the gang to a brutal home invasion where a Venezuelan couple was bound, pistol whipped, and tortured. One victim's fingernails ripped out.
The charges include firearms trafficking, drug trafficking, and a barbaric murder-for-hire plot in which several of the defendants agreed to kill 2 people for $15,000 and return their severed heads as proof of the murders for just an extra $5,000.
This wasn't just rumor, this was terror. But here's the twist. While some officials warned Tren de Aragua had already taken root, others insisted the threat was grossly exaggerated. Even some residents pushed back, saying the real danger wasn't gangs, it was landlords charging sky-high rent.
Here, none of us feel threatened. We don't feel threatened by any gangs. We feel threatened by the owner of this apartment who asks us constantly to pay a high rate.
Still, the fear spread faster than the denials. And that fear, it was about to go national. It didn't take long for the fear in Aurora to jump from local headlines to the national stage. And the person who seized it? Donald Trump. On the campaign trail, he painted Aurora as a war zone, overrun by Venezuelan gangs. He pointed to Tren de Aragua as proof that Biden's open border policies had unleashed chaos in American suburbs.
Where Venezuelan gang members have taken over parts of the city, they've taken over apartment houses.
Trump promised a crackdown like nothing the U.S. had ever seen.
I'm announcing today that upon taking office, we will have an Operation Aurora at the federal level.
The message was clear. Denver wasn't just another city. It was ground zero in Trump's immigration war. But it didn't stop there. Even outside the campaign trail, Trump doubled down. Standing in front of Congress, he declared Aurora a beautiful town destroyed, claiming it had buckled under the weight of a migrant occupation like nobody's ever seen before. For Aurora's residents, hearing their city described as destroyed on national television was a gut punch. Mayor Mike Kaufman, who is a Republican, called Trump's words very disappointing.
I'm concerned that if we allow this narrative to stand without challenging it, there indeed would be economic consequences.
Even Aurora's police chief pushed back, saying flat out,
"This city is not overrun by TDA. This city is not controlled by TDA. I'm going to stand up in front of you right now and say that is an incredibly false narrative.
Councilmember Danielle Jurinsky, the same one who first raised alarms about Tren de Aragua, shot back that image wasn't the point. I'll never worry about protecting our image over saving people's lives, she said. So now, Aurora wasn't just a city dealing with ICE raids and gang fears. It had become a symbol, a political battleground where local leaders and national figures clashed over who got to define the city's future. And Trump's Operation Aurora was about to smash headfirst into Denver's own laws, setting the stage for an even bigger showdown. Trump's tough talk collided with a harsh reality. Denver is a sanctuary city, and that meant local jails and police weren't about to hand people over to ICE just because the federal government asked. Under Denver's sanctuary policies, if someone was arrested on local charges, they might face trial or even conviction. But when ICE came knocking, saying, "Hold them for us a little longer," Denver usually said no. In their eyes, sanctuary laws kept neighborhoods safer because people weren't living in constant fear. But ICE saw it differently, much differently. In their July statement, Denver Field Director Robert Guadian didn't mince words. He argued that many of the people arrested during the raids had already been in local custody, but were released instead of being handed over.
Unfortunately, we have to come to the communities because we don't get the cooperation that we need from the jails. It would be so much easier and so much safer for our officers and agents if we could take these people into custody from a safe environment.
For ICE, that was the green light to go harder. They framed the 9-day blitz not just as law enforcement, but as punishment for Denver's refusal to cooperate.
But if we have to come out in the community to do this, that's what we're going to do.
And so the raids grew bigger, louder, and more traumatic. Families went into hiding. Kids stopped showing up at school. Entire apartment blocks shut their blinds, waiting for the next knock at the door. Protests erupted across Denver. Hundreds of people filled the streets, furious not only about the raids, but about the way Trump's administration was turning their city into a stage. One longtime resident, whose building had been raided, said it felt like their whole neighborhood had been branded a crime zone.
I was expecting this to happen, and not just because we do have immigrants here, but because this place has a reputation, and its name has been put out there as if this is a dangerous place and whatnot, which it isn't.
But not everyone agreed. Others, like Denver local Eric Schwann, said they were relieved someone was finally doing something about crime in their neighborhoods.
It's been horrible. It's been really horrible.
With his pet lizard on his shoulder, that's how Eric Schwank described his neighborhood before he woke up to find federal agents swarming this apartment complex.
You know, I got 13 grandkids. I got 4 children. You know, we walk by here every day, you know, and they're scared to come out of the house.
Denver was split. Were these raids terrorizing families or cleaning up neighborhoods? And then came the numbers that undercut ICE's story. By July 27th, ICE had nearly 57,000 immigrants in custody nationwide. But here's the kicker, 71% of them had no criminal conviction. If Denver was truly crawling with cartel hitmen and fentanyl traffickers, why didn't the numbers add up? Which left one burning question. Was this really about crime? Or was Denver being turned into a stage for Trump's biggest immigration play yet? By the end, it was clear. This wasn't just about a gang, or even about Denver. It was about control of the narrative. ICE pointed to fentanyl busts, cartel ties, and violent fugitives. Activists pointed to families ripped from their homes, kids left crying in hallways, and the staggering fact that most detainees had no criminal record at all. Aurora became a symbol, used by Trump to fuel his immigration war, used by ICE to flex federal muscle, and used by activists to expose what they saw as government overreach. And it left residents stuck in the middle. Some believed they were safer, others felt hunted in their own homes. But everyone agreed on one thing: Denver would never feel the same again. Because if one city can be branded a war zone overnight, if raids with flashbangs, smoke grenades, and armored teams can become the new normal, then the question isn't just about Denver. It's about where this story goes next. If Aurora was the test run, who's next?